The regular meeting of the Charter Commission Government Structure Work Group will now begin.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Charter Commission's Government Structure Work Group. This meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 due to the declared local health pandemic. For the record, my name is Greg Abbott. I am one of the co-chairs of the Charter Commission's Government Structure Work Group. I will now call this meeting to order and ask that the clerk call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Commissioner Ginder.
Present.
Commissioner Metke.
Present.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Clegg.
Present.
Co-chair Garcia.
Present.
And co-chair Abbott.
Present.
There are 6 members present.
Let the record reflect that we do have a quorum. We will now proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's Legislative Information Management System, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. Commissioners, the agenda for the meeting is before us right now. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion before the clerk calls the roll? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion to adopt the agenda.
Commissioner Ginder.
Aye.
Commissioner Metke.
Aye.
Commissioner Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Clegg.
Aye.
Co-chair Garcia.
Aye.
And co-chair Abbott.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
The agenda is adopted. The next item on the agenda is listed as item number 3. We are receiving presentations from invited guests regarding the government structure of comparable cities. Trudy Maloney, Director of Council Operations, and Rachel Tierney, Assistant City Attorney, are here as representatives of the City of St. Paul. And Jason Luce, City Attorney, is here as a representative of the City of Rochester. We will begin by allowing the representatives from each city to share a brief overview of their government structures, beginning with the City of St. Paul, and we'll follow that with a question and answer portion with both cities answering each question at the same time. The questions, of course, have been provided in advance, so I think we should have if there are any questions about the questions, please let me know in advance. But let's go ahead and start with the City of St. Paul. And please, if you could give us a brief overview of your government structure.
Okay, Rachel, I think you're up for this one.
All right. Thanks, Trudy. Hi, I'm Rachel Tierney, the Deputy City Attorney. And to explain what our process is, when I explain it to new council members or new attorneys, I say we're a lot like the federal government. The mayor has similar powers to the president, where he runs the city departments and the day-to-day administration of the city. The council has the legislative authority. The mayor is not a member of the city council. And that's kind of the simple way to understand our structure. And there aren't a whole lot of differences in the structure itself.
Okay. And Mr. Luce, how about the City of Rochester? If you could briefly describe your structure, please.
Not sure I can do it as brief. Ours is a bit more complicated. First, I'd like to thank everyone for inviting me. Thanks to Maddie, especially. For those that didn't know, Maddie's mom was actually our city clerk in Rochester. She recently moved to Colorado, but she was our city clerk for the last 3 years. And I would imagine Maddie is doing as good of a job as her mom. She was a great clerk. Briefly describing our government. So we have, technically it's a council manager form of government, or council administrator form of government, I should say. The mayor has a unique role. However, the mayor does not sit as part of the council. She does attend the council meetings, and she does have She doesn't have any voting rights, but she does have veto power. So in a sense, she does have executive privileges. She does not run the city departments. I'm using the pronoun she because the current mayor identifies as a woman. But she does oversee the police department, which is pursuant to charter. Why it was set up like that, I do not know. We have a city administrator who oversees the day-to-day operations of most of the departments, and this will probably get into more of one of the later questions, but I'll say on paper, we also have 3 charter boards that we call them. They're boards that are established in the city charter. The park board, the utility board, and the library board. So our library director, parks director, and utility director technically are under those boards. They're hired at the pleasure of those boards, on paper anyway, and take direction through those boards. So that's about as brief as I can get with our structure.
Okay. Well, let me jump into the questions then, and I think we'll go back to St. Paul. What are the best attributes of your city structure, and what are the biggest drawbacks of your city structure?
Trudy, do you want me to start?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
I'll pick up.
I think that the best attributes is that there's a pretty clear line of authority for who has which role. So there's an awful lot of clarity, and this will come up in the subsequent questions as well. Drawbacks are hard. This is the only kind of system I've operated under. I suppose if you're on the council, you think one of the drawbacks is that the council has limited authority in directing the operations of staff. If you're in the mayor's office, you think that's a benefit. So I guess it depends on which side you sit on, but I don't think there are too many drawbacks. I think that it works pretty well, and we do have a pretty nice example, and a lot of people can really understand the way that it works because we are so much like the federal government.
Okay. Mr. Luce, how about Rochester? Best attributes and biggest drawbacks?
Well, from my perception, I think the best attribute is there's no single source of power. So the power is divided throughout the organization. So we don't have one person, unilaterally making decisions or otherwise exerting too much power. The drawback, I guess, would be the opposite of St. Paul. Then it does get confusing, and later, I guess one of the other questions is, how does it look on paper versus reality, and paper doesn't necessarily match reality. It's varied. Even I've only been here for 3 years, and in my time here, it's when we switched mayors, for example, we had a lot of differences. So there's not that continuity, and it does cause some confusion.
Okay. Let me ask, how does in terms of the chain of command, how does the administrator function, or do the ordinary department heads report to the administrator, and is there any direct contact between council members and city employees, or does it go through the administrator?
That's a good question. So on paper anyway, the city administrator oversees all the department heads except for the city attorney, the charter heads, and then the police and fire chief. So he does. So the city administrator oversees the rest of the department heads. Our council actually has a code of conduct that they adopted, whereby they more or less indicate they will not go to department heads for most things without going through the city administrator, just to avoid one council member, creating pet projects within one department, for example. We have a requirement that that the city council vote as a whole to direct staff to do something. There are exceptions to that. If they receive a call from a constituent stating, someone ran over the stop sign on First and Elm, then they'll send an email to the Public Works, for example, and let them know. So it's not a strict rule, but if, for example, they wanted to establish a minimum wage in the city, for example, they wouldn't just go and talk to one or two department heads. They would need to go through the city administrator and bring it to a council meeting and bring it to a vote to direct staff to do a large project like that where it's going to take up significant resources.
Yep. And just let me go back to St. Paul and ask a similar question. The best attribute, of course, is the clear chain of authority. Do you have any instances in St. Paul where council members try to direct administrators or department heads on particular topics? Or does that even come up in your system?
Yes,
Yeah, very much so.
every day.
All right. And this kind of foreshadows question too, but it's like, how does that happen? What happens with those conflicts and how do they get resolved?
Well, I guess I'll take that one. I think a lot depends on who the mayor is, who the deputy mayor is, and what the relationship is, and the ask that the council member has. If it's a simple complaint that a road needs to be plowed, there are already avenues for council members to report that to the department head and that kind of thing. But if it's a policy issue, and depending on where the mayor and the deputy mayor sits in terms of that issue, then it gets a little murkier. Rachel, do you want to add on anything there?
No, I think that's a good summary. I mean, I think if it's a non-controversial issue, department directors and even many city staff routinely respond to requests from council members, and there's not really a conflict. But the more that the council members try to step into policy making, depending on the administration, some administrations allow that routinely and some don't allow it at all.
So it's essentially up to the mayor in terms of how the city staff is a response to the council. Is that kind of a good summary?
Yes.
Okay.
Mayor and deputy mayor. The
And
deputy mayor plays a very key role in the operations of the city.
Okay. Is the deputy mayor position, is that established in your charter, or is that a discretionary position?
It's not established in the charter. The mayor has assistants under the charter, but the deputy mayor is not under the charter. We've had some mayors who didn't want to have deputy mayors, and then shortly into their term ended up appointing deputy mayors because it's almost like an informal administrator. It's really the individual who runs the day-to-day operations of the departments.
So the deputy mayor functions as a chief of staff, essentially.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into question 2 then, to the extent that we haven't already covered that. How does your system of government work in practice in comparison to how it's supposed to work on paper? How is direction given to departments by the mayor, the council committees, or individual council members? How are conflicts about directions to the departments resolved? And do personalities, as opposed to position and formal role, play a part? Do personalities overwhelm formal process? And I guess I'll go back to Rochester and Mr. Luce. Is there anything on question 2 that you want to add that we haven't already discussed?
Yeah, I would just note that, on paper we have the 3 charter boards, and again, in paper it states that these boards have the authority to hire, fire the directors. In reality, they do work under the city administrator. I think the rationale for that is these boards are appointed by the mayor and ratified by the city council. So the city council therefore has oversees these boards, so they in turn oversee the director. It's just even though it doesn't say it on paper, they do report to the city administrator. I would say this kind of answers multiple questions, I guess. One of the problems was before our new mayor, I guess, came on board, our former mayor took a very different approach to the job. He did not take on the charter responsibility of overseeing the police department. And the former police chief was definitely under the city administrator. Then the new mayor, when she came on, she wanted a more active role, and she follows the charter much closer and makes it very clear to the council that the police chief is her employee, and she does his performance evaluation, not the city administrator, which is a change. Again, the charter's always said that, but it definitely was a change when she came on board. Wouldn't say that's good or bad necessarily. It's just something where, the city, I guess, got away from following kind of the letter of the charter. As far as conflicts go, there's not a lot of them other than what I just described with the police chief. Since I've been here, it's been pretty pretty much under the city administrator. So the council defers a lot on the city administrator to run the day-to-day thing, and if there are conflicts, it's the city administrator who's expected to take care of them, not the council. And as far as overwhelming the process, I would say that's something that's been taken care of with our council procedures. Before I got here, the council didn't have any formal rules or procedures, and they would have individual council members that would overwhelm the system, I guess, or overwhelm the process by constantly coming to staff with pet projects, kind of working behind the scenes on a lot of things. And that's one of the things I did was put in rules of procedure that and a code of conduct that formalized that a bit more. So I wouldn't say that's the form of government. I'd say that's kind of the individual rules within that, the governance, where the individual members will abide by that and not take up too much staff time.
Okay. Going back to St. Paul, with respect to question 2, how does it work in practice as opposed to how it works on paper? How are directions given? How are conflicts resolved? And do personalities overwhelm the process or formal role? How would you respond to that in terms of St. Paul?
Personalities play a large role. And a lot has to do with the relationship, I think, between the council and the mayor. Do they work together, or are they of different opinions all the time? So, for example, when I first joined St. Paul, Mayor Randy Kelly was there, and Mayor Kelly did not have a very good relationship with the majority of the council at that time. And there was literally it was very difficult as council to get information from the departments. When Mayor Coleman came in, that totally changed, and there was a lot of good working relationship and a lot of communication between the administration and the council. Rachel, do you have anything to add? Or do you have a different perspective?
The only kind of bright line difference that I see is the role of the deputy mayor in really running city operations. That's not on paper, but in practice, our deputy mayors for, the past 20 years at least, have really been the individual running the day-to-day operations of the city. I agree with Trudy that personalities matter, and the city operates real differently depending on who the deputy mayor is, as well, I think. And of course, there are council members or individuals with strong personalities, but I don't think that I think that the system is stable enough to actually provide some balance and control for that.
Okay. Let's move on to question 3. Is the separation of executive and legislative power an element of your city's system? And if so, how important is the separation of powers in defining the roles of the mayor, the council, and the administrative staff of your city? And let's go to Mr. Luce in Rochester. How would you describe separation of powers in your city?
Sure. The mayor definitely is the executive branch of the city, and the council, the legislative. I think it's a good question, actually, a timely question for Rochester, in that our charter commission is actually starting to explore this topic in further defining the role of the mayor, given that we have mostly I guess you'd call it a weak mayor system, where she doesn't have a whole lot of direct power other than veto power and the police department. So they're trying to look into further defining that and seeing if there's ways they could strengthen the charter, better define her role, I guess, would be the best way to put it.
Okay. And back to St. Paul, I know that, you've got a explicit separation of executive and legislative power that you've already talked about. Is there anything, anything you want to add to the separation of powers discussion that you haven't already mentioned previously?
I can't think of anything really. I mean, no, I can't. I can't think of anything. Rachel?
The one detail that I would add is our code does have something a little bit unique, where we have both a legislative and administrative code, and the council can, in some ways, direct the work of departments through the administrative code. So they would have to pass an ordinance in order to direct the work of departments, but they do have that ability. So whereas in the federal government, you've got the Code of Federal Regulations and the rulemaking and things like that. We do have an administrative code that the council adopts. So that would be one kind of difference.
Okay. That's very helpful. Thank you. Question 4. Does your city's government structure promote accountability for administrative staff? Why or why not? Do you think a different structure would improve accountability for accomplishing the city's goals and objectives? And let's go back to Mr. Luce and Rochester.
Yeah, I'm gonna give a real lawyer answer, I guess. Yes and no. So I don't think it's so much the structure. So prior to so Rochester went through a lot of change about 3 years ago when I came on. Our city administrator started about 2 months before I did. But his predecessor had been with the city for 43 years, something like that. So we had a city administrator who had been there for 4 decades. And I'd say that the government structure relies heavily on that city administrator to provide the accountability. And I would say that after 4 decades in the role, that had gone by the wayside quite a bit. We had a number of department heads that had been here 20 plus years, and it was a very siloed, each department kind of did their own thing. And for me anyway, I'm cleaning up a lot of the messes from that. So I don't think it's the structure so much. I think if you have a solid professional manager, and you have a council that is, checking in and doing doing regular check-ins and meeting with that manager on a regular basis. I think that's the key to having that accountability. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily the structure so much as having the right professional staff in there and making sure that the council is acting as as an actual board of directors and making sure that manager is doing what they hired him or her for.
Okay. St. Paul, how does your structure provide accountability for administrative staff, or why or why not? And do you think a different structure would improve accountability?
Well, I'm going to probably drift off into a little bit more opinion and not be so objective, but St. Paul has, especially some of its larger departments, has a very entrenched bureaucracy. And they all know that when the mayor leaves office, they're going to get a new director. And so they can hold firm on a lot of different things and make it difficult for whatever director is in that role. I think that's why it's very difficult. One of the reasons it's very difficult to create change in some of those truly entrenched departments.
Okay. Ms. Tierney, you have anything to add?
Yeah, as far as accountability goes, again, I kind of think it depends on which chair you sit in. If you are part of the administration having control over, the council, the administration nominates directors of departments and then they're approved by the council. But after that approval, the council's role in that department director goes away. And so, I can see how if a particular department director was difficult to work with from a council perspective, their hands would be tied. And so I think that a council who is frustrated with the department director might tell you that they don't have enough accountability, whereas a mayor who wants to be able to remove an ineffective department director can do so quite easily.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, how does your city's government structure compare to other cities with which you are familiar? If you can you compare your city's government to Minneapolis? And we'll go back to Mr. Luce in Rochester.
Sure. For a little background, this is my 4th city I've been in. I started my career in local government in Fargo, North Dakota. We moved to Laramie, Wyoming, where I was the city attorney. Moved to Portland, Oregon, where I was a deputy city attorney, and now Rochester. I really can't compare it much to Minneapolis. I'm not as familiar with Minneapolis. I did do a little research in Minneapolis. It looks like it's very, very much a strong council form of government. I will say that Portland is one of the few cities in the country that still uses a commission form of government. I highly doubt that you'd be interested in going that direction. That's somewhat outdated. Portland's a city of about 650,000 people, and they have 4 commissioners and a mayor representing the entire city. So you get into a lot of issues and they're all at large. So you can have large swaths of the city feeling that they have no representation. So, and the other problem there is you have basically it's more like it's like a strong mayor form, kind of like St. Paul, I guess. But you have the mayor dividing up the departments, and each commissioner appoints, makes a political appointment for the department heads. So you have revolving department heads. You have no continuity. You have no professional staff in charge if they're all political appointees. My personal opinion is that having strong professional staff is a necessity. Having political appointees who are only there for a short time, where everyone working under them knows they're going to be gone in 4 years or less, is not ideal. So, in my opinion, I think the strongest form of government is a council manager form of government, where you have the council acting more as the board of directors, and hiring a professional manager. In a city, in a larger city, I mean, it obviously depends largely on the size of the city. In a city the size of Minneapolis, that manager is working for the council and really managing the department heads. Obviously, they're not able to micromanage, however many thousands of employees they have in Minneapolis, but they're able to ideally prevent the silo effect and create more of a team approach, and allow be that facilitator, I guess, between the departments, so that there is a common boss, I guess, who is a professional, is well, appointed by the council, rather than, appointed by like a strong mayor, where it's going to be someone different whenever there's a new mayor. You have someone who's got more skin in the game, I guess, and probably more in tune with, in the professional associations like ICMA, and just better able to provide the council with that expertise. So again, that's my opinion. Definitely can respect some others, but that's my experience.
Great. And St. Paul, question 5 again. How do you think your city's government structure compares to other cities, and if you can compare it to Minneapolis?
Well, I believe St. Paul is like a textbook strong mayor form of government, with really no surprises in what to expect, as Rachel explained initially in our structure. Maybe just a little bit about my background. I worked for the city of Minneapolis. I joined Mayor Fraser's office and then left in 2004. And while I was in Mayor Fraser's office, there wasn't one day that I didn't want a strong mayor form of government. And it really wasn't until I came over to St. Paul that I started to respect and better understand the beauty that the Minneapolis government has. There's value to not having the buck stop with just a mayor. And I think it fosters more innovation. When you have a strong mayor form of government, the buck stops. If there's an idea that doesn't work. On the other side, if the mayor has an idea, that gets implemented in a much faster time than in Minneapolis.
Ms. Tierney,
Rachel?
do you have anything to add?
Not really. Trudy's certainly the expert on Minneapolis. I've spent 20 years in St. Paul. I find the system to be pretty efficient, but I do think that the reduced role of the council can be limiting.
Let me just add, from the St. Paul standpoint, last either of you. I mean, one of the things that we've tried to do, I think, in drafting our concepts here is try to preserve the best of both, right? And preserve an active and an engaged council, but also give clearer lines of authority for department heads and city staff. And I guess, Ms. Maloney, I guess there must be a happy medium in here, right? I mean, it's not, I kind of would like to think of us looking for maybe we've talked about this as an executive mayor legislative council proposal. It obviously ends up being a kind of something of a bit of an increase in mayoral power, but I still think there's some balance here. In terms of your experience in both Minneapolis and St. Paul, do you think there's kind of a happy medium to be struck?
I do. I do think there is. I can't tell you exactly what that is. When I was working in Minneapolis, the city coordinator had certain departments reporting to that position, and other departments reporting directly to the council and mayor. And I know that created some problems in trying to execute some priorities that the city had. And it made me sometimes wonder whether expanding the city coordinator's role wouldn't be closer to that kind of hybrid, where the city coordinator still reports to all 14, but also has more authority over all departments. Because so many times in order to get something done, you have to work cross-departmentally, and there would be some dead stops to try to get some initiatives going because the coordinator didn't have that authority.
Okay. And that's done with our questions. I guess should open up to our other work group members or other members of the Charter Commission who are in attendance. Does anybody else have any questions for our representatives from Rochester and St. Paul? I'm not seeing any. I guess Commissioner Ginder has raised his hand. Go ahead, Peter.
I'm sorry I don't have video, but I have a question, I guess, for Ms. Maloney. And I understand the concerns about, if you have a mayor that has bad ideas or is not receptive to working with others, that you can have, bad results. And conversely, you might have really good results with a strong mayor who's thoughtful and all the other attributes you'd want in a mayor. But structurally, which system do you find to be more efficient? When we did the interviews with department heads, and based on my own experience, that a lot of times people are trying to please the so-called 14 bosses. And that kind of disappears in St. Paul. Do you find that St. Paul is more efficient or not efficient in the current structure?
St. Paul is more efficient, but I think for that efficiency, you lose some of the innovation and creativity. I know you didn't ask me that question, but just the thing that I was surprised when I came to St. Paul was where Minneapolis had brought on an enterprise-wide finance system way back in the early 90s. St. Paul was just beginning to do that in the middle 2000s. They were doing equity training in Minneapolis in the 90s. St. Paul just in the last 10 years has picked up that work. And so I think there's something to be said for innovation and creativity that's fostered in Minneapolis. But in terms of efficiency, yes, our roads get plowed and we things work much more efficiently than in Minneapolis sometimes.
Thank you. I appreciate the insights, Trudy.
Any other questions from other commissioners, other work group members? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody raising their hand. Let me, on behalf of my co-chair, Jill Garcia, and the chair of the Charter Commission as a whole, Barry Clegg, let me extend my extreme thanks and gratitude to the representatives of St. Paul and Rochester that have come with us to share their perspective. This is the sort of thing that is really helpful to us as we try to chart a path and figure out what we're going to do with respect to any proposals we make. So thank you, Mr. Luce. Thank you, Ms. Tierney and Ms. Maloney. This has been very, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. I think that completes item 3 on our agenda, the presentations. Let's move to item 4 on the agenda, which is proposals and recommendations. And we are approving a summary of proposals for possible reforms related to the government structure. And we are basically, at this point, voting to send those proposals forward to the next full meeting of the Charter Commission, which I believe is Wednesday, February 3rd. I certainly will be subject to correction if that is correct. So attached to the packet is the updated summary of initial proposals based on our vote at the last meeting. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. As you recall, at the last meeting, we took off the line item veto. And so I guess a motion would be in order to forward our summary of initial proposals to the overall Charter Commission. Is there a motion to do so?
So moved, Ginder.
Is there a second?
Second, Smith.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Sending this to the overall Charter Commission? Seeing no discussion, I will ask the clerk to call the roll on adopting the motion.
Commissioner Ginder,
Aye.
Commissioner Metke,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Clegg,
Aye.
Co-Chair Garcia,
Aye.
Co-Chair Abbott.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
The motion is adopted, and our summary of initial proposals will now be transmitted to the overall Charter Commission. That completes item 4 on the agenda. Item 5 on the agenda is amendment drafting process timeline. And we have put together a timeline for completion of the amendment drafting process, because obviously we're going to have to come up with a specific draft to incorporate our initial proposals. And that also was included for the packet for the meeting if you've got it. What we've got is obviously today's meeting, January 19th, next Tuesday, the 26th, we hopefully will have a work group interview of current city council members about our proposed draft and draft amendment, followed the next day by hopefully an interview with Mayor Fry about our proposed draft. February 3rd, of course, is the overall Charter Commission meeting. And then the work group drafting sessions, we have tentatively scheduled between February 8th and 26th. And we're going to basically, our concept is that we would meet twice a week for a few weeks in order to hash out the very specific, the X and the O's, the deletions, the additions. And these are the meetings where we're going to be parsing out words and getting out the thesaurus and getting out the drafts with the strikeouts and the insertions. So the initial proposal, as we've figured out, would be Tuesdays and Thursdays, February 9th and 11th, February 16th and 18th, February 23rd and 25th. And the final draft that we will send to the final actual draft with all of the deletions and insertions should be approved on February 25th. And of course, obviously, other members of the Charter Commission are welcome to these meetings, and we welcome the input. And then, of course, the next overall meeting for the Charter Commission after that would be March 3rd. And then at that point, and this obviously is an issue for the overall Charter Commission in terms of public hearings and when to schedule public hearings. And then the April 7th would be the overall Charter Commission meeting where we would present our full report on the proposal to amend the charter. And at that point, we would think that the overall Charter Commission would then be able to vote on whether to submit the proposed amendment to the electorate in November of 2021. Of course, we have to kick it over to the City Council to have them discuss the language to put on the ballot. That's the proposed timeline. I guess I would seek any input if anybody has a different perspective, or if we need to change this to accommodate certain scheduling. I mean, I don't know I think we've accommodated all holidays and whatnot, but does anybody have any comments on the proposed schedule at this point? Doesn't look like we have any comments. I don't know that we need a specific motion to adopt the schedule. But I just wanted to go through that and give everybody notice of what those meetings are going to, when those meetings are going to occur. And that's item 5 on the agenda. I guess, is there any other business or any other comments by any members of the work group or other commissioners who are attending before we adjourn? Seeing no additional business, let me thank everybody for their attention and their good questioning. Thanks again to the representatives from St. Paul and Rochester. And without objection, the meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you, everyone.